Baldur's Gate 3 is inarguably one of the greatest RPGs ever made, and until just a month ago I hadn't played the game other than a few hours at the beginning of 2024. Once I started playing the game properly, I was sucked into the amazing world building, characters, and fantastic gameplay systems of Baldur's Gate 3, and was truly shocked by the pure magnitude and quality of the game, which really exceeded all my already high expectations. Everything that this game does, from its combat to its exploration to the depth of its choices and its characters, to the way the gameplay systems innately allows you to build freedom in every manner, is truly extraordinary and is something that I haven't seen in any other video game I've ever played. Today I want to drive home why you should play Baldur's Gate 3 in 2025, of course without any spoilers. If this is your first time playing a game like Baldur's Gate 3, which was definitely the case for me, even the gameplay in the background of this video might seem a bit jarring, especially if you're used to the usual third-person, heavy action-oriented adventure games that are commonplace nowadays. Baldur's Gate 3 fits into a genre that is considered more niche, being that of a CRPG, which in its simplest terms literally just means computer role-playing game, but has come to be associated with a game similar to that of the original Baldur's Gate games and similar isometric RPGs. CRPGs are often associated with deep and complex gameplay mechanics, which often wield you a ton of freedom in how you decide to approach the objectives of the game, and really solve anything in the way that you desire. Baldur's Gate 3 takes the concept of a CRPG and dials it to the max in terms of every aspect that is resonant with the genre. As you might have heard about this game before, the gameplay systems, right down from the classes to the combat, is based on a modified version of the 5th edition of Dungeons and Dragons. And don't worry, I have no idea what that means either, as I've not played D&D before, but essentially things such as rolls in order to check whether you're able to persuade an enemy or deceive someone of your wrongdoings can be based on your character's attributes when rolling a die. That's probably the simplest way to explain what this game really is, but it really is a content-packed party-based RPG, where every choice and decision you make can shape the world around you and the nature of your very adventure in this beautiful high fantasy world. Now, getting into more of the substance of the game, I briefly want to tell you about the beautiful world and the accompanying exploration of it in Baldur's Gate 3. Baldur's Gate 3 is divided into 3 large story acts, each comprising a wide variety of locations and environments that are highly diversified and varied, making every area in the game feel truly unique and fun to explore. The world of Baldur's Gate 3 is extremely well designed, with every nook and cranny of this world filled to the brim with detail and activities to find in every corner. Finding an underground hatch or entering a locked house in Baldur's Gate 3 isn't simply a 10-second task, but rather it may lead you to discovering a new quest, interacting with new characters, or even finding yourself a new piece of armor or weapons. Everywhere you go in the world of Baldur's Gate 3, there is something to find, something to gaze at, and something to immerse yourself into. Of course, without getting into any spoilers, I won't highlight any of the specific examples, but it's quite obvious by the gameplay in the background of simply the first act in the game that Baldur's Gate 3 is truly packed with things to do, and it is a game where exploration of its world is constantly rewarded in abundance. I have never played a game that rewards you for exploring every crevice like Baldur's Gate 3, and my second playthrough of the game has seen me finding innumerable new areas, quests, and people to interact with, and it truly feels like the world in Baldur's Gate 3 is boundless in every aspect. Every environment in the game is so well designed and developed, and you can really feel the innate passion of the developers every time you find yourself within the grasp of a new and exciting area to explore. Now, as for the combat, this might arguably be my favorite part of the entire game. As I mentioned earlier, when discussing what exactly Baldur's Gate 3 is, I spoke on the fact that all of the game's gameplay systems are based on a modified version of Dungeons and Dragons, and this rings true to the combat system of the game as well. Baldur's Gate 3 is a turn-based, party-oriented game like many other RPGs out there, and so you and 3 of the companions that you bring along with you in your grand journey will take turns in combat in order to take down your enemies while minimizing their turns as much as possible. You and your companions, which you can control in combat, all have a limited movement speed, which makes strategizing and planning where you're going to place yourself in the battlefield an extremely important aspect of the game's combat loop. Within combat, you have an action where you can either jump, dash, or cast a spell or a melee attack on an enemy that is within reach. In addition to your normal action, you also have a bonus action, which in many cases will also allow you to jump, but importantly is where you can also use other less combat focused abilities, such as teleportation or simply drink a healing potion. It is really important to know from early on that learning how to properly utilize the full effect of both an action and a bonus action is core to winning fights in this game in the most effective manner. Of course, depending on your class, as you level up, you may gain an extra attack in combat, which is essential in those late game fights where enemy health is significantly multiplied. Other than the balancing of your actions in combat, the positioning of your party is also extremely critical to your success within combat. You can always stun or put a variety of other debuffs on your enemies through your attacks, but this won't really matter if your positioning isn't that great. Getting the high ground on your enemies will provide you with an advantage in combat, which essentially means a higher chance to actually hit your enemies, and this also counts true if you surprise your enemy with a sneak attack or hit them while you're invisible. If any of what I just said sounds a bit complicated, don't worry. I also had no experience with games like this, and it may feel overwhelming for the first couple of hours, but with some practice and experience in the game, you'll slowly begin to get a feel for the game's mechanics, how to build your character, and how to most effectively win all combat encounters. Now, this is a section I can only briefly touch upon, as it's really hard to discuss anything in depth in regards to the game's character and story without spoiling anything. I will say though that it is extremely important to note that unlike most other games that provide you with the illusion of a choice, every single choice and action you take in Baldur's Gate 3 has lasting impacts that can be felt through every act in the game. Baldur's Gate 3 is truly a game in which all and every decision you have ever made until the very end of the game will shape your journey accordingly and will shift as you change your character's motives and direction. My second playthrough of the game has wielded completely different scenarios in the story due to my choices and actions being different from my first playthrough, and it is obvious that no one playthrough of Baldur's Gate 3 would be the same. And it's not like a decision you made in Act 1 will only impact you and the course of the story itself only in Act 1, but it creates a continuous and gradual impact that will be felt the entire time while you're playing the game. This game has a great high fantasy narrative shaped by the player themselves, but the star of the game's story-related components is surely its wide cast of companions. Every companion in this game is so unique from one another and so well written, with character arcs that are not only encapsulated within a single quest dedicated to that companion, but rather each character develops substantially from Act 1 all the way to the end of Act 3. The characters and their deep level of writing isn't only constrained to the game's companions, however, but so many of the characters and individuals you encounter within your journey through this incredible world have their own motives and desires that make them so interesting to interact and converse with. Overall, everything in regards to the characters and story, in addition to the choices that define them, is masterfully done, and Larian has done all of this to a great level of quality throughout the entire game. With all that said, I hope I've convinced you to give this game a go, and I hope you see why this game is a must-play for all fans of RPGs and fans of games in general. With complex gameplay systems and such intriguing characters and a well-written story, you'd be hard-pressed to find a game that lives up to the quality of Baldur's Gate 3, and I assure you that you're going to have an absolutely fantastic time in your journey through this game. Anyway, that's all from me for today's video. If you enjoyed it, please consider subbing to the channel for more Baldur's Gate 3 and RPG content, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.